Good morning. My name is Pastor Chad Fair. I served at Gethsemane Lutheran Church in Gainesville from, don't hold me to these dates, 2014 to about 2018. And I had the pleasure of meeting Ron under bizarre circumstances. So I was in my office one day and I got a phone call. His mother, Marjorie, was a member of our congregation, and she had passed, and Ron called to make arrangements to discuss her funeral service. After that, I literally hung up the phone. I went to a place that I had gone frequently for lunch. I believe at that time the place was called Chomps. When I left, it was Sal's place. Is it still? No. Is it closed?
Mother's.
Whatever, Mother's. It was Chomps initially, so that's where I finished up that phone call with Ron, and I hung up the phone, and I went and grabbed lunch as I always had. I usually would sit at a high-top table, and I would order food, and I would sit up and do work for the afternoon. And this guy would always kind of hobble in and joke around with everybody and hop up at the bar and have a beer. And so I saw him all the time. Like, I was there, and there was Ron. Well, as I would say as luck would have it, but I don't believe in luck, as God would have it, that day after my phone call with Ron, I went to Chomps for lunch, and I sat at the table, and the girl who, I don't remember her name, said, Chad, I'm really sorry, like, I'm the only person here, like, I'll be there as soon as I say, I can sit at the bar. It's not, pastors are allowed to sit at bars. So I went up to the bar, and I sat, and Ron was a few stools over, and he was telling her how he was having a hard day because he just had to have a conversation about his mom passing away. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't mean to eavesdrop, but what's your mother's name? And he said, Ron Johnsrud. And I said, Ron, we just talked on the phone. I'm Pastor Chad. So he hopped down he says, okay, if I sit with you. We sat for probably a good 3 hours that day. Talked and shared some tears and some memories. That became my practice at least once a week. From that moment on until the time I left in 2018. We had lunch literally not every day, but every week, at least once a week, and often multiple times. We talked about everything. We talked about family. We talked about those dogs. We talked about the church and all the ways in which the church was terrible. And many of those I happen to agree with him on. And Ron became not just a friend, someone to have lunch with, but he was sort of filled that counselor role where I had someone that was not actually in the congregation that I could go and discuss. You get the point. We got to have those conversations, and he was deeply helpful in my time here in Gainesville. So I'm going to open, and so knowing Ron, having this be a formal funeral service doesn't seem right. I wore shorts today because I only saw Ron in long pants once, and that was at his mom's funeral. I'm like, you know what? We're going to do this. We're going to do this right. So I'm going to open with a prayer, and it's going to be a really loose prayer. And Ron, I'm going to ask forgiveness because this is the only churchy part that we'll do today. Let us pray. God of grace and glory, we remember before you today our brother Ron. We ask that you guide him, accept him, and wrap him in your love. As we gather here today, console us who mourn. May we have faith in your everlasting peace and comfort. Amen.
Thank you all for coming. This is a hard thing, but I want this to be joyful because I feel joyful in many ways. When Ron and I met in 1981, each of us was in the midst of a life transition. I was looking for a new career, but uncertain what direction I should go. I said words like, I want to go into the private sector, but I had no earthly idea what private sector really meant. I had been raised as a teacher from a family of teachers, and so I was really at a crossroads. And as happens sometimes, the universe gave me some directions, and one of my students said, I'm going to go for 3.5 months backpacking and hiking up to Alaska. Do you want to come with me? you know, she said, I was going to take my dog, but my parents really wanted me to have another person around, so I thought, oh, okay. Maybe the dog would be better. I'm from Nebraska. It's flat. I don't know about hiking in no mountains, right? So I began to, so I said, yeah, we're going. And so we did 3.5 months of hiking and camping, and our only rule was we were not going to ever pay for lodging. So we found ourselves in the wilderness a lot. But we had a tent, and we had our food, and we had a 1-burner stove, and we were like set. It didn't matter. So we went on numerous adventures up through the Canadian Rockies, and climbed up to the base of Mount Robeson in British Columbia, where the British RAF was camped, because they were doing winter hiking things. That was really pretty interesting. We finally made it to Anchorage, and Carolyn said, Chris, I need to make a phone call. I have a cousin who lives here. I haven't seen him in 20 years. I don't know what he's like, but she said, if I don't call him, if I go back to Des Moines, Iowa, and say I was in Anchorage, and they say, well, did you talk to Ron? She would say, there would be hell to pay. So, because they had a very close family. So, okay, so she calls this guy, and she said, well, he had a really nice voice on the phone. And so they agreed that we could meet at 10 o'clock in the morning on Monday at a Denny's restaurant in Anchorage. And if you've been in Alaska, you probably know where that Denny's is. Anyway, so we met there for coffee, and he was a pleasant enough fellow. Carolyn and he, you know, reminisced over old times and discussed family stuff, and then he had to go to a lunch date, and Carolyn and I were trying to get ready for a hike later that day on the Resurrection Trail, and I really didn't want to go. I was like, oh man, it's raining. We have been hiking for 3 months. My boots don't fit, and I'm like, really, I think I'm just done. But nevertheless, because it was raining, we went shopping a few stores in Anchorage. She bought stuff because she was very wealthy. She had lived around the world and had acquired a number of things. She sold 3 Persian carpets to finance her part of this trip, if that gives you a clue. I, on the other hand, was a teacher, making something like $400 a month. And so we were in different stratospheres. But so she shopped and bought, and I watched and wished. We decided to go for lunch at a deli. It was still raining, and we just got sat down, and out comes Ron and his lunch date. And he spotted Carolyn, because you could spot Carolyn across the room. Carolyn had this blonde hair that glows in the dark. It's just, she walks in the room, and I mean, everybody, and to this day, it's the same thing. You know, she walks in the room, and all the eyes just going like, who's the blonde? And so Ron swooped over, he escorted, he says, wait there, took his date back to wherever she worked, and he came back and joined us and proceeded to then, with the gift of gab that he had, to convince us that we really didn't want to go on that hike. There are a lot of grizzly bears up there, it's raining, why don't you stay in Anchorage, I will show you all the sights. Sounded great to me. You know, this guy had a place to live. He had a bathroom with a shower, you know, after being on the road for so long, and, you know, it was fine. So we said, yeah, sure. Okay, so Ron and I got married on June the 12th, 1982 in Lincoln, Nebraska, after a fairly whirlwind courtship. We honeymooned on Mackinac Island. It was cold. It was June. I'd forgotten that in the Northlands, things don't warm up until after July the 4th. Most things were closed, but we had the island pretty much to ourselves. It was great fun. We returned to Des Moines, packed up the apartment, gave the kitten to my neighbor who detested cats, but agreed to keep the cat until we could fly it to Florida. Put the bird in her cage, put the cage in the old pickup truck, unair conditioned, I might say, but it did have a heater in the engine. And so we arrived in Gainesville on July the 6th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I got out of the truck at the parking lot at the Days Inn Motel on Newberry Road and I-75, and immediately felt totally crushed by the weight of the water in the air. And we came here. Why? Because I got accepted for the doctoral program at the University of Florida. And Ron didn't have it. He was in transition too, so he had nothing better to do but say, okay, fine, let's go get married and move to Florida. I'll follow you. We'll go down there. So we did. All right. I'm sure we looked like the Clampetts, you know, because we had this old truck, bench seat, bird in the middle in the cage, you know, windows open, sweating like crazy, you know, driving into town like the Clampetts in Hollywood. Anyway, Ron decided to enroll at UF, finish his undergraduate degree, which had been interrupted by the draft for Vietnam in the 70s. He had already had 2 years of college, but he got it accepted, and then, by gosh, he decided he'd major in anthropology. In my life, I swore there were 2 things I would never do. I would never live in Florida. I had been here once, and it was horrible. It was Miami, and it was for the Orange Bowl. Nebraska won, yay! But the heat and the people, and it was just more than I could stand. And I had been in anthropology all my life, and I knew all these anthropology people, and I thought, oh, I'm not going to marry somebody like that. They were fine as friends. Finest friends, right? All my anthropology friends are sitting back there. But you know, so then when Ron decides he's gonna major in anthropology, I thought, okay, I've come full circle. Everything I swore I would never do in my life, I have now done. Okay. Anyway, we had a great time being students. We took vows of poverty, you know, to be graduate students, got the student loans, you know. Lived on, you know, ramen noodles and spaghetti and beer when we could. We met Brian and Karen and David and Kathy in graduate school, yeah. And I think together, and there was another couple too, but the 8 of us, I think we were able to aid and abet each other so that we all got through the programs. We all graduated. And we've been friends to this day. So, you know, I've only known Ron a few weeks longer than I've known David and Kathy and Brian and Karen. And so, all right, so we finished all that. Ron got a master's degree. He got a job at Lake City Community College, where he landed in academic advising. And he was really good, and he loved it. And he was the kind of guy that, he had a way of explaining things to young people who didn't have much worldly experience. Nobody in their families had gone to college. They didn't know what words like matriculation and prerequisites meant. And he had a way of demystifying all of that for these kids. And I think he had a tremendous, tremendous impact over the years on the kids that came and see him. We'd go out somewhere, or we'd be at a mall, or we'd do something, and somebody would come up to Ron and say, Mr. Johnsrud, wow, do you remember me? And of course he'd be like, oh, I don't know. Oh yeah, he says, you know, I you know, you told me that maybe I shouldn't go into crime scene investigation stuff because I didn't have the chemistry background. He said, I'm so glad you didn't, because now I'm in banking and I just love it and it's great. So that was the kind of thing, and it was really fun to run into those people and know that Ron was having an impact there. So he was also a really gifted teacher. He worked for a while, even before he got to the community college, he worked with Tammy Bernard at the Sylvan Learning Center, where he was tutoring kids. And he would come back home and he'd say, well, he said, you know, I had these 3 kids and they just couldn't understand algebra at all. He said, I finally figured out a way to help them understand about X's and Y's. And he had this whole thing that he developed sort of spontaneously. It's so like, you're a Y, and there's an X over there, but that X is surrounded by some other Y's. It's like you see a girl in the other room, and she's got some boys around her, but you want to meet that girl, so what do you have to do? You have to go get those other boys away from her, you know, so that she's all by herself in the room. He said, I thought, man, I wish somebody would have taught me that when I was in algebra as a sophomore in high school. But anyway, he was really fun. He really enjoyed it. And then as, we settled in. I graduated finally. I got my degree before I was 40, which was the whole goal. And was hired by the guy sitting in the back of the room in the yellow shirt, Ron Thornton. And Ron Thornton ran a center at the University of Florida, and I learned a whole lot. He taught me how to write proposals. The center was funded by NASA, so I got a lot of information about NASA, which led me to help finish my dissertation, which was on the space program, by the way. And it was a very, very productive and great time in my life. But Ron and I did other things too. We played golf for a while. And we had weekly, Sunday mornings, we were on the golf course, often with Brian and David. And we did all that sort of stuff. And then sort of golf went by the wayside, and we got into Australian Shepherds. So for about 10 or 15, 20 years, we raised maybe 3 litters of Australian Shepherds. It was heart-wrenching to give them to new homes, but I think they were happy. We started getting into obedience and confirmation and training, and ended up actually having one of our dogs go to the Westminster Dog Show, which was a real insight. So we went, other people took her because they wanted to show her, and so fine, Ron and I just made a vacation out of it, went to New York, went to plays, and visited her at Madison Square Garden. And she didn't win, but it didn't matter. We did our share of traveling around the U.S., mostly visiting family, went to Oregon several times, Iowa, Nebraska. In 2000, and Ron went to Europe a couple times through Lake City. He led a couple of tours there. But in 2019, we bit the bullet and said, we're gonna do the Viking River cruise in Europe. And so we did. And we took the Viking cruise from Prague to Paris, and that was an extraordinary adventure. I'm so glad we did it, because we all know what happened in March of 2020. So it was great. But since he's passed, of course, I've been reflecting on a lot of this stuff in our life together, and I want to go back a little bit and talk about when we got married. Because when we announced our engagement, everybody said, "What? What? You and Ron are going to get married?" My mother, she was dubious. My friends were like, "Are you serious? You're really getting married? I mean, this guy must be something special for you to get married." Because I had a great life. I was single. I was living in Des Moines. I was a teacher at a community college. I had a great social life. Life was good. But then, okay, so yeah, I'm going to get married. People said, you don't understand. This is not going to last. You are so different from each other. You are just like night and day. It's never going to happen. So I said, well, my heart speaks. And so we got married. And as I said, we knew we were different. We knew. But at the same time, I wasn't sure how different we were, but I've been reflecting on how we managed our differences through our marriage. And so I pulled out 3 or 4 things where I think the differences showed up the most. The first one, of course, is the sense of humor, which we did not share. Ron was really more of a Red Skelton, George Carlin kind of guy, And I was really more of a dry wit, wordplay kind of person. He was pie in the face, and I was like a subtle joke over here, or, But sometimes he would surprise me. And we would be somewhere, and he would pop, or we'd be in the car, and he'd pop off something, and I was just destroyed. I mean, destroyed, laughing, belly laughs, tears spewing out of my face. And every time I would think about whatever it was he said or the motion that he did, I would just be reduced to a laughing mass, But, it was, and that was good. It almost made up for the fact that oftentimes when we were in a restaurant or in some public place, Ron would break into his, rendition of Donald Duck. And, but those few times, they were few, but they were incredible. When we connected on the humor thing, it was magical. The other place we were different was in problem-solving approaches. So I got to tell you a little bit about me first, but I'm a planner. When I cook, I follow the recipes, right? And I measure twice before I put stuff in the bowl or the pan. If I'm confronted by some sort of a problem, I look at that problem from every angle. And I look at potential solutions. And I work in my head. I work out what are the long-term effects of it. How is that going to play out over a period of time, right? And I'll spend a long time, sometimes hours, sometimes days, figuring it out, all right? And so when I feel like I figured it out, I would go to Ron and say, we should do this. And it would be like, for him, it would be like something coming out of outer space in left field, because he didn't know I'd been going through all of this mental stuff. Well, Ron was different. Ron was a wait-and-see kind of guy. I was the planner. He was like, if something happens, we'll deal with it, whatever. Why can't you? We need to plan, I would say. So, case in point, we had a squirrel that got trapped in our fireplace. And we only knew, it'd been in there for, 2 or 3 days, and because the cat would be sitting for hours in front of the fireplace, staring in, and I thought, oh, there's got to be a critter in there, oh my gosh. And then I finally saw it. I was shining the flashlight in, and there's this squirrel. Man, what to do? So I immediately put my brain power to work, and I thought, and I came up with what I thought was a perfect solution to keep the squirrel from escaping and running loose in the house. We had a bunch of dogs at that time, and I thought, I don't want the dogs mangling the squirrel in the house, or even outside for that matter. So I came up with what I thought was a really brilliant plan, and I went to Ron and I said, okay, I figured it out. I want you to go and find like 3 or 4, maybe 5 big boxes, like refrigerator kind of boxes, okay? Because I think what we can do is we can make a tunnel. I can put these refrigerator boxes end to end, and we can take them from the fireplace around and out the back door, okay? And he just looked at me. He just like, he didn't even dignify it with a comment, He just like, okay. So I went back to my office and I was doing work and so on. I came out about an hour later to find Ron sitting in front of the fireplace in a folding chair. The door was ajar and he had a poker in his hand. And in the fireplace on the grate was the cat carrier. And the door to the cat carrier was open. And he had put a little bit of bread and some peanut butter and some water in the cat carrier to lure the squirrel in. Of course, the squirrel was starving and dying of thirst by that time, so the squirrel went in. Ron shuts the cat cage door, picks it up, takes the cat carrier outside with the squirrel in it, opens the door, and the squirrel scrambles up the tree. No big deal. I looked at it and I thought, oh. So it's like, and every once in a while after that, if I would come up with some kind of a harebrained scheme or some sort of convoluted, complicated solution to a problem, he'd just look at me and say, refrigerator boxes? So I was remembering that story the other day, and I was laughing out loud, and it was just so typical. of the kind of relationship we had between the two of us, right? Math and statistics was another example. You know, Ron always understood why everything was so. I had no clue, but I could do the operations. I could do the equations, and I could come out with the right answer, but I had no idea in the world what it actually meant. And I've always said, between the two of us, Ron and I made one decent statistician. Career was another difference area. You know, unlike me, Ron never thought much about having a career. He really didn't. You know, and in fact, I think sometimes he was a little uncomfortable when he was with me and we were around all these bunch of high-powered PhDs and engineers and scientists and all this kind of stuff. And you know, Ron was just sort of a regular guy. And you know, he would really much rather sit at the bar with somebody like Chad or an acquaintance, somebody he never knew, and just regale them with stories about living in Alaska, about camping, about fishing, about hunting. He had some great hunting stories about the 5 grizzly bears that they walked in the midst of and never got attacked, and all sorts of things. In Texas, when he and Connie lived in Texas, it was about riding motorcycles and doing other things. In Alaska, it was about the wilderness and pitting himself against nature. He was not really driven by aspirations. He didn't want to be the best at anything. You know, he wanted to make enough money to have a comfortable lifestyle, to do what he wanted to do, and have good friends around him. You know, he was happiest when he was sitting around having a beer with somebody just talking. You know, and that was I think his real driver. I, on the other hand, was a product of some very, very ambitious people, and which was great, but I was always kind of driven to succeed and try to make it to the top, you know. But he taught me that's not always what you need to do. Sometimes you just need to be there, and you just need to live, and you just need to experience, and you just need to have good friends around you. And the final thing I wanted to mention was intuition. I am convinced that Ron was gifted with the sight. I do believe that this man had such empathy and such an intuitive grasp of other things and people. He was able to connect with people on a very, very deep level. And he could sense when somebody was in trouble. You know, he told me stories all through our married life about, there was one time in Texas when I had this girlfriend thing, and you know, she and her husband, and we were all good friends, and we were bikers together, and one day I walked out of the house and just red alarm bells were going off in my brain, and I knew something was wrong. So I went right over to her house, only to discover that her washer had flooded everything in the house. You know, and it's like, it was that kind of thing, the little thing. He would often know who was calling on the phone, and that was before caller ID. Even with caller ID these days, I don't know who's calling. He struggled mightily with computers. I mean, his thought process, he was so intuitive. He just wasn't a zeros and one, if this, then that kind of guy. You know, it just drove him crazy he thought Siri should read his mind whenever he asked a question, right? And he just did not understand computers. And this whole business of, he would never remember a password. I finally made a notebook and wrote them all down, and then he would change them and forget to tell them, and of course he wouldn't write it down. So then he would need to do something, and then, there is no password. I don't know what to do. Computer goes away, you know, so I'll deal with it later. You know? And I think because of a lot of that, I'm the kind of person who I do everything online. You know, I move the money online. I call people on the phone to ask them questions. Ron was the kind of guy that needed to go to the bank and talk to the teller. You know, he would walk into the post office and mail, you know, I'm thinking, why are you wasting your time doing that? But Ron was more about people. I'm going to do this. This way I know my letter's going to get where I want it to go, or I know the money's going to go into my account or whatever. He had a calmness about him. I always said you could talk anybody down from a ledge. When everybody around him was in sort of panic mode, or in his mental health background, he did a lot of mental health training in the military, and he was working in the hospital at Elmendorf Air Force Base, and a lot of Vietnam vets were coming through, many of whom were seriously in emotional and in mental and physical trauma. But he just was always so calm. They could talk to him, and he would listen, and he would gently ask a question or two, but they would feel so much better after talking with him. He was just that kind of guy. He was not judgmental. I never heard Ron say a bad thing about anybody in his whole life. Well, maybe one person.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Probably the same person I'm thinking of too, yeah. Anyway, but he was just that kind of guy. Now, over the years, though, despite our differences, which we often ended up laughing about, we also understood we shared some very, very deep values, and shared a goal about life and living that was really the foundation on which our relationship was built. We had the same vision of qualities of life that help make our home, the neighborhood, our town, our country a better place. He was devoted to his parents, and shouldered a lot of the responsibility along with his brother Dave when his dad had a massive stroke in 1999, and circumstances ended up, we moved them to Gainesville, where Ron and I got a real crash course in assisted living and nursing homes and Medicare, long-term health care, and all kinds of stuff. But Ron took great care of his parents. His father passed in 2001, I think. His mom passed in 2015. But he was right there every step of the way, overseeing their final years and making sure that everything was done right. The last year of his life was difficult for both of us. But I cherish the life we built together. We navigated and negotiated and weathered the challenges. One moment. But in closing, I would like to read the poem that we had read at our wedding. I think we use this poem as a framework for our life together. The poem is called On Marriage. We'll get there. It's by Khalil Gibran, who was a Lebanese poet who lived from 1883 to 1931. And the poem goes, "You were born together, and together you shall be forever. You shall be together when the white wings of death scatter your days. Yes, you shall be together even in the silent memory of God. But let there be space in your togetherness, and let the winds of heaven dance between you. Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. Fill each other's cup, but drink not from one cup. Give one another of your bread, but eat not from the same loaf. Sing and dance together and be joyous, but each one of you be alone. Even as the strings of the lute are alone, though they quiver with the same music. Give your hearts, but not in each other's keeping, for only the hand of life can contain your hearts. And stand together, but not too near together, for the pillars of the temple stand apart, and the oak tree and the cypress grow not in each other's shadows." And that to me really sums up the relationship that we had. I don't know what my next life chapter is going to be. Not a clue. But I do know this. You will be a part of it, as Ron is in my heart. And I know, and your support has kept me afloat these last 2 months, well, more than that, the last year. I am looking forward to the coming months. I really am, and years, because I know that you all are at my side, and Ron is in my heart. And I think that it's going to be a wonderful, wonderful experience creating my new chapter with you. Thank you. All right, so now, who wants to go next?
Hi, I'm James. I'm Ron's son. I didn't get to meet him until 2016, I believe it was, when I first met him for the first time. From everything I've heard from people who have known him and have known me, they say that we are quite a bit alike. We look alike. We've got very similar personalities, senses of humor, and whatnot. And so even though I didn't get the chance to really get to know him, from what I'm gathering, as I get older and I develop more, what I see in myself is probably exactly what he was like. And I'm loving what I've heard about him, and so it just encourages me for the future. I came down here in 2016 for the week and got to meet Chris and Ron, like I said, for the first time, and it was an amazing week. And we got out and did a bunch of things, a bunch of activities, just got to know each other. I said I didn't get to know him as much as I would like to have, unfortunately, but again, we had some amazing activities and stuff we went out and did. One of the memories is we went out to on a deep sea fishing trip. I love fishing. I'm not great at it, but I'm decent at it. But we went on this deep sea fishing trip, a boat called Not Tied Down, and it was, he got a little bit seasick going on the way out, so he ended up kind of staying in the cabin or in the shade mostly, and I did most of the work. I remember the day before when we went out, we got out to the dock to see what everybody else was catching, to get an idea of what to expect. And I know that they were bringing in a bunch of a smaller redfish, not the red snapper, but the mangrove snapper. And we're like, okay, so we'll expect to pull something like that in. And on our trip, even the captain and the first mate was shocked at the stuff that we were pulling in. It's like, we caught some of the mangrove snappers were so much bigger. Our smallest one that we caught was bigger than the biggest one of the other boats that had been out that day. One we'd caught in mahi fish, and we just had a wide variety. It was amazing. But the best one that we had caught, we were actually at the top of the marina when we got back. Even the captain and the first mate had never caught this particular type of fish, this type of fishing. We were doing kind of the bottom fishing, and we actually caught a wahoo, and they say that they have never caught one flatlining with, instead of trolling. And so when we got back to the marina, the marina had heard about it. We were at the top of the marina when we got back. We had so much fish. The freezer that they have in their garage was packed with fish. I'm talking the fillets were huge. That was amazing. It was so much fun. I know that we'd gone down to Disney, the three of us, and did a couple of the parks there, and just hanging out, getting to know each other. Did the Hogwarts train and whatnot. We'd gone down to NASA and Cape Canaveral and whatnot. Also, there was one trip where Chris and Ron had come down to San Antonio one day, or Chris had some type of event that she was down there for, a conference. And I just happened to be, I live in Dallas, but I'm a season ticket holder for the Spurs, which is my favorite team. And Mom and I were going to go to the game that day, and we found out that Ron was down there and ended up getting a third ticket for him to join us. And he got to experience what it was like going to a game with me and seeing how loud I can be at the games. And he had an amazing time with me, and it was just kind of developed him into a Spurs fan also. I know every time there was a game, that if we couldn't make it, we were texting each other or calling each other. It's like, hey, you watching the game, you yelling for the Spurs? Like, you better be yelling loud so I can hear you. But he just, like I said, from the little bit that I've got to know him, he was an amazing guy, and I look forward to developing into the type of guy he was, and I hope to make him proud and make you proud, and so. Anyway.
Thank you.
And I was asked to reintroduce myself. I'm Dave, Ron's younger brother. I lived in Northern California the last 40 years, little town. And not really sure what to say. I don't remember a lot of the early childhood years. I don't know, nothing bad happened or anything like that. I just don't recall. So I can't recall Ron when he was younger, but as we got older, I recall that guy. Ron was a character. Chrissy hit on so many points about Ron that are head on that I knew, and I remember going up to Anchorage. Gosh, I was in the 70s, I reckon, and I was sitting there with my big coat on and all that kind of stuff. Here comes this dummy out with a t-shirt and shorts. And I just sat there looking out that dang window, and I couldn't figure that out. That didn't make sense. But then, like, it made sense when he told me. Once you get there, you get used to it. So what did I end up doing? I didn't wear shorts because I didn't bring any with me. But I wore my t-shirt, you know. Rod's adventures, he liked to share, like you said. When we had a chance to be together, he'd share different things. I wish we would have had more chances over the years, but you know, I went south to California, Northern California. Yeah, there's a big difference, big difference. And Ron went his way to school and all that. I got out of high school and I did pretty good. You know, I don't have the college education, but it was fun when I talked to Ron and Chrissy. That didn't make any difference. You know, I was who I am, which is different than Ron, which is nice, because we are each our own. You know, each one of us are individual, and it was really neat to see Ron as Ron, and to talk with him and how he thought, and the way I thought, and then a lot of times we didn't agree, but that's fine. It's the way it's supposed to be. We don't have to agree with each other all the time. And Ron was kind of challenging sometimes, because he would get in he'd lock in on something. He wouldn't change. He would not change. And so I figured when that happened, I ain't going to change either, so we're just not going to talk about it anymore. Because I didn't believe in, you know, arguing or stuff. I don't like that kind of atmosphere. So we just kind of let it go. But everything was always cool afterwards. That's what's so neat about it. And a couple of things that I remember about Ron. He had I don't know how many you might remember, a 1960 Plymouth Valiant. To me, it was the ugliest car in the world. I could not stand that car. But Ron loved that thing. And his friends, one Gary, I don't know if you know, Gary Knipple was his name. He had a 60 Pontiac Ventura, beautiful car. And Dan Schultz had a 55 Chevy, a straight axle in front. You probably know what I'm talking about, but two different cars. And Ron had this ugly little black Valiant with red interior. Just remembered that. But his love of that car, his love of things was interesting. You know, we each have things we like, and it may seem, you know, I didn't like that car, but that wasn't the point. It was his car. And I think I started learning from them, maybe you start, if somebody they like it. You know, because he had different things he liked that I didn't like, and I had things that he probably didn't like, I'm sure he did. Because we were two different folks. Two different folk. We were the same in some ways, but we was different. We was different. I just ramble because I don't know what I'm saying. Chrissy hit on something though that was really big with Mom and Dad. It was so wonderful being so far away, and knowing after they left Oregon, I spent 5 months in Oregon after Dad's stroke, and then we got him decided to send to California, send him to Florida. But I never had to be concerned. I don't cry when I get close. Never had to be concerned about how Mom and Dad was being taken care of. I didn't have to know all the details. You'd like to know all this stuff, but I didn't have to. I got the general stuff. And I knew Ron was, and Chrissy, can't forget Chrissy. They were taking care of them. What more can you ask of a brother? The love was there, and when you can't be there as a son or a daughter, whatever the case, I don't know what to say. God bless you guys. God bless you. And I'm not going to say what I'm actually doing it. That is rare. That is rare. I did just want to say our sister couldn't be here, so I just want to bring her. Her name's Jana. She wasn't able to come down, so I wanted to mention her too. So forgive me for not saying anything, but that's about all I have to say. And this guy, he looks so much like his dad. I had never met him till just the other night. I still get my goosebumps. It's remarkable. I better go because I'm actually going to do it and I don't want to.
Okay.
Anyway, I know where Ron's at. I know we'll see him and the folks again. That is the biggest joy. I call this what we're going through now, the human side. But I always like to look like where Mom and Dad and Ron, whoever, they're up there. And as a Christian, we want to be up there. And someday we'll be with them as Christians. And I try to put that as in the forefront and then deal with the earthly side, or the human side, I should say. Gosh, that makes a difference. Sorry I didn't recognize you, Chad. It's been 7 years, but I don't know if you remembered. Probably, I hope you didn't. A little longer, but yeah, it's still me. Anyway, I'm sorry. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
You're welcome,
I'm Dave, and I'm reading from Dave. This is actually a recollection from my father, Chris's sister, and he is currently living in Kenya, therefore unable to be here today. But so this will be in the voice of my father, Dave. So this is the full Dave experience. Fine. No, alarms don't, yeah. I've done that in class. So my father was once the pilot of a PA-24 Comanche Piper airplane. And it was something he was able to do to get up out of all the chaos and challenges of the world. And it was a little slice of heaven each time. And that's a memory that I will always share as well. One day, he had met Ron and was able to take Ron up for what Ron's first flight in a smaller plane would have been. Well, I suppose not in really the military, but together, first time together. And it was a crystal clear day, perfect for flying. There were hardly any bumps. It just seemed like glass. Then my father says, when we got over the countryside, I asked Ron if he wanted to do the flying. And he said, really? And you imagine? And my father responded, of course. He didn't hesitate. He showed him the basic ways of turning the aircraft and keeping it flying straight and level. And then after a bit of time, he seemed confident. So my father released the controls and said, your aircraft, which meant that Ron's job was just to keep it straight and level and maintain altitude. He was doing a great job. And perhaps a bit of Grandpa Floyd in my father, but he decided to kind of start to push the envelope a little bit. And my father began pressing the right rudder pedal just to make the rudder deflect slightly and have the airplane start to move a little bit off course and wonder what Ron would do. This action yawed the nose of the plane to the right, making it hard to keep flying straight and level. Ron countered nicely, turned the ailerons a little bit and right when he started doing that, my father took his foot off the rudder. And when everything was perfectly straight, nothing had happened. When all was well, my father kind of looked again and pushed the right rudder pedal again, much harder this time, reminding him, oh, you better keep this plane flying straight. I told you to keep going east. And again, he tried to counter the yaw to the right, and not realizing that the rudder was going the other direction. He pushed ever harder, causing him to say, what the hell is going on? Continued to work hard, keeping straight and level. He noticed, one, he was starting to sweat a little bit as he tried to keep it under control, and at no time did he ask for help. Then I took my foot completely off the pedal, and everything snapped right back to level. And it all became well again. He looked over at my father and said, so what were you doing to me? I innocently said, me? How could I be doing anything? You saw my hands on my lap. I had given total control to you, but his smile must have given it away because Ron knew that something was going on to make the flying a little more difficult. He said, yeah, I saw, but what about your feet? You were doing something. And then I showed him how the rudder pedals worked in the next step of the control and make a coordinated turn. He learned very quickly and was becoming a good pilot to be if he ever wanted to do so. He had just a natural talent for that. Anyway, that was always our joke, the time when he began to sweat, but he didn't panic. Ron was a good spirit who liked to make people laugh and would always be available to help anyone in need. I have no doubt that he impacted many lives in a good way. That's just what good spirits do. And that's from my father, Dave. And I don't have much to recall except some nice evenings in the breezeway between the house and the garage playing darts. And Ron letting Matt and I win a little bit. And then every so often he would show who really owned that dartboard. And other times we were in the basement at grandmother DJ's house and we were playing pool and we all figured we were getting pretty all that about pool, and Ron would come down and show us who really was boss at the pool table. And you just do not want to think about playing against him in table tennis. It just is not a thing that is done. And all those dogs he loved. And just the connection. He was just the head of that pack, and it was just wonderful. So it's been wonderful every opportunity we had to see him, and it's just a wonderful person. So.
And Ron asked me to do a toast. Ryan and Karen and Kathy and Chris were there, and I don't know if you do it, but I sort of locked up. It was sort of like. And nothing happened. And, over the years, that was okay. All of us went through times when we weren't at our best. And we stayed friends, we stayed caring, and sometimes we sort of thought, well, next time, But Ron was always a joker, and he'd get this look in his eye. Just if you were watching, you'd see it. You think, oh crap, he's going to come up with, it'd be a joke or a terrible pun. I mean, oh, or he'd talk like Donald Duck. Yeah, right. But you'd have to smile because you'd have, he was enjoying it so much. He loved his own humor. He appreciated the hell out of it. And so Kathy and I got to know Chris and Ron when we were graduate students at UF 40 years ago. And we played bridge first, I think, and at our house was where we played because we had the baby. And Emily was, we couldn't leave her babysitters. You'd have to give them money, wouldn't you? But anyway, people would come, they'd bring their own beer or whatever, and we'd play bridge, and we had these cheat sheets we'd pass around. And they were annotated and marked up, and you'd talk, table talk, oh, never, except all the time, Like, well, I wouldn't do that with 2 clubs, And there was one where we had 2 tables, and I went over to the other table and I said something like, oh, I just left my partner with 6, whatever it was. And everybody looked at me, oh. But it was fun, and we laughed an awful lot. And we got to be very good friends with Chris and Ron and Brian and Karen and a few others. And we'd go and play golf. Brian and Karen, not Karen, Brian and Ron and Chris and I would go and play golf. And Brian would hit the ball. You know how they do on TV? You hit the ball and it goes up there in the sky. He'd do that. And then Chris would get up. She did it 100 yards. It didn't matter what club she used. Nothing changed. She'd go, and it'd go 100 right up the fairway. She often got the lowest score because she was consistent. We didn't know about that. But, so I'd hit it ball, and I have hit a ball straight sideways. And that's hard to do now. Not everybody can do it, but I can do it, and I can repeat it sometimes. But Ron would get up, and if he was really hurting, Ron, had a lot of back problems like that. If Ron was really hurting, he'd hit it beautifully. But if he was feeling good, if he was having a nice day, he did it right in the woods. I mean, it was a strangeness. But while he was a joker, he had a really serious side too. He saw me. He saw people, and he would call you on it. He would say, "What's up?" And a lot of times you chicken out. It's like you see somebody's not looking quite right, but you think, "I don't want to bother them," But he thought he ought to bother you, and it was usually a good thing, And nobody's mentioned what an enthusiast he was. You ever collected cans? Not like Ron. You ever collected? Ron fell over on his head one time collecting cans at the side of the road. And it probably cost him more in that one moment than he ever earned collecting cans. But he collected a hell of a lot of cans. So Chris, remember this, Ron. This is the one that we enjoyed so much and who will last in my mind for so long.
That's true.
The more pain he was in, the better he played. It was unbearable. But he was a gamester of all kinds, actually. He and I hit it off right away because we played golf, we played pool, we played bridge with the group, we played darts, probably a host of other things I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. And, you win some, you lose some. He had his victories, I had mine. It was always competitive. I mean, that's the American way, right? You compete, you try to win, but it didn't matter who won or lost. Ron was the epitome of sportsmanship. If he won, there was no bragging about it. If he lost, no whining or moaning. He just, for him, it was how you played the game. And for me, good sportsmanship is something I've always valued and seems to be more and more in short supply these days. So I miss that about Ron. He was doggedly determined to do things if he wanted to do them. Again, you're surely all aware of the joint problems he had from as long as I knew it, which goes back 40 years and probably predated that by some. And one day we got together for one reason or another, and he says, "Oh, I started taking Taekwondo lessons." And I said, "Isn't that kind of hard on your joints?" And he just shrugged and, it's something I want to do. And that was just so Ron. He didn't keep it up for years. I think he took it as far as he felt like he could, but wasn't going to keep him from trying. Same thing goes with golf, going back to golf again. Golf is a sport that is very hard on your joints. And a golf swing puts almost every joint in play. And even when he was hobbling around the course, and you knew he was suffering pain with every swing, didn't keep him from playing, at least not for many, many years. I think ultimately he stopped for much as I did. Our respective joint problems kind of made it little too painful to do, but he played for an awfully long time in pretty rough condition. And one more thing, there's probably various stories I could tell, but one sort of really stands out and comes to mind. Ron was a pretty courageous fellow. Again, if he wanted to do something, he'd do it, sort of danger be darned. I remember one time we were over at some friends of Ron and Chris's fellow dog breeders. And they had, like Ron and Chris do, a very large property. And he had accumulated, not Ron, but their friend, David, had collected this huge, huge mountain of leaves and branches and trees and stuff. I mean, it was just huge. And so we were gonna have this big bonfire. Well, Ron says, okay, well, here, take the gasoline, put it on this, down at the base of this thing. And I said, Ron, my dad taught me when I was a child, you only use gasoline for one thing, and that is to put it in a tank to run a gasoline engine. It's volatile, it's dangerous. So we're all inside the house. Next thing you know, Ron's outside. We're not really paying attention to him. But he'd gone out to sprinkle gas all around the bottom of this bonfire. And we suddenly hear this just tremendous boom. I mean, it was loud. And I ran to the door and expected Ron, like in the movies when they're wearing a fire suit, see him running like this on fire from head to toe. Thankfully, he was not on fire at all, thank goodness. But he kind of comes up to the door and he's got a sheepish look on his face and he goes, something to the effect of, Brian, I guess you were right. I hope he didn't play too much with gasoline after that. In any case, I guess those are the things I wanted to mention about Ron. I feel like I've lost a really dear friend and I miss him a lot.
Common themes that we in humanity don't quite do enough of. One, is share those stories. We don't get together and share those stories and those memories enough. And two, we don't tell people that we care enough. You have an opportunity to continue to share those stories and those memories and those feelings. Do it, please. It's important. And my turn to cry. Although I do it a lot. So when I got your text message a month or so ago, I was so excited that I was getting a text message from Ron. And then it hit me that, what an ass. Like, I have not reached out. It's something I'm not good at. We get caught up in our lives. Our lives are busy. Take that moment and pause. Take that moment and pause and reach out to them. Because we have those moments and we go, oh, I'll do that. And then life goes on and we don't. Take that moment and pause. So